The rain had fallen for 3 days straight in the small town of Millfield, washing the streets with a gray monotony that seemed to seep into everything. On the night Elizabeth Liz Thornton went into labor, the wind howled like an omen. Lightning struck somewhere in the distance, illuminating the darkened windows of the Thornton house. Inside, Elizabeth gripped the hospital bed, teeth clenched, sweat mixing with tears as pain tore through her body. James Thornton, her husband of 6 years, paced the sterile hallway outside. He was a decorated officer in the town's police department, known for his rigid discipline, his unwavering sense of order, and a prejudice that many whispered about but never dared confront. His hand occasionally twitched, betraying a tension that words alone could not explain. He loved Elizabeth, he told himself, but he loved control more. Hours passed. The cries of newborns punctuated the monotonous hum of fluorescent lights. Then, finally, a nurse appeared at the door, her face unreadable. "It's a boy," she said gently, leading James into the delivery room. Elizabeth, exhausted and trembling, looked up at him. "He's beautiful," she whispered, reaching for the tiny life swaddled in the blanket. James stepped closer, and then the color drained from his face. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and for the first time, Elizabeth saw something dangerous flicker behind the mask of her husband's authority. This can't be mine," James said, voice low but laced with venom. Elizabeth froze, the words slicing through her like a knife. "James, what are you saying?" "I'm saying, look at him," James said, stepping back, eyes locked on the baby's dark skin. He's not mine. You've..." His voice broke. Rage, fear, and disbelief warred in him, twisting his words. "You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we have." Elizabeth's heart stopped. "James, I swear, he is yours. You have to trust me." He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Trust? After seeing this?" "No. I can't." He turned abruptly, walking toward the door. "I need air." And that was the beginning of a storm that would shake the very foundation of the Thornton family. Over the next week, James's denial did not soften. Friends and family tried to intervene, but James's pride and prejudice formed an unyielding wall. He refused to hold the baby. He refused to acknowledge him. At home, Elizabeth stayed in a fog of grief and confusion. She paced the small nursery, rocking the child gently, whispering reassurances. Meanwhile, James returned to work as if nothing had happened, putting on the armor of the officer everyone knew him to be. But in private, he replayed every detail, the baby's skin, the shape of his features, and convinced himself that betrayal was written in them. He couldn't reconcile the life he thought he had built with this unexpected reality. Elizabeth, however, found strength in her child. She spent hours marveling at the tiny fingers and tiny breaths, each one a reminder that love could survive even the harshest rejection. Her resolve hardened. She would not let James's hate define the child's life. But James's fury wasn't just private. He began spreading doubt to anyone who would listen. Family members, colleagues, neighbors, planting seeds of suspicion, twisting Elizabeth's reputation. "You don't know her," he would say, a faint tremor of shame buried under layers of anger. "You don't know what she's capable of." Elizabeth faced whispers, judgmental glances, and growing isolation. But for every whispered doubt, the baby's smile reminded her that love and truth could endure. Weeks passed. Tension in the household escalated to a dangerous edge. James refused to change, his denial becoming a silent, invisible threat that loomed over every meal, every conversation, every attempt at normalcy. He had not touched the child, not once held him, not even allowed him in the same room without visible discomfort. The house was full of the unspoken, resentment, fear, and heartbreak. Elizabeth, exhausted and heartbroken, reached the limit of her endurance. One rainy evening, she confronted James in the dim light of the living room. The baby slept in his crib, oblivious to the storm swirling above him. "James," she said, voice trembling but firm, "this stops now. You either accept him as your son, or you leave this house. I will not let you poison his life with your hate. I will not let you do that to me either." James froze, anger and disbelief warring in his eyes. You think you can just tell me what to do?" "I'm telling you the truth." Elizabeth said, her voice rising with the strength of motherhood endured too much. This is your child, and he will be loved, with or without you. And in that moment, James realized that the war he waged against the undeniable truth had only just begun. Will James accept the child, or will his prejudice and pride continue to destroy the family from within? Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let's continue. The tension in the Thornton household had become almost unbearable. Every room carried a silence thick with unspoken anger, punctuated only by the soft coos and tiny sighs of Marcus, the child whose very existence had become a battlefield. Elizabeth moved carefully through the house, always mindful of James's unpredictable temper. She fed Marcus in the kitchen, humming softly to mask the anxiety that clung to her like a second skin. James, however, could no longer hide the storm inside him. He returned home each night from the station with a simmering fury, pacing the halls, his uniform still crisp but his soul in turmoil. Every glance he cast toward Marcus ignited a conflict he could barely contain. Pride, prejudice, fear, and love tangled into a chaotic knot that made him restless and harsh, even to those who had once admired him. One evening, as Elizabeth tucked Marcus into his crib, James leaned against the doorway. His expression was unreadable, his hands gripping the frame tightly. "I've had enough," he said quietly, the calmness in his voice far more terrifying than any shouting. "I need proof. I need a DNA test. If this child is mine, fine, but I won't live with doubt, not for a single moment." Elizabeth looked at him, heart pounding. She had expected anger, cruelty, avoidance, but this demand cut through her like ice. She hesitated. "James, you know he's yours. We've been through everything together. Why do you need this?" James's jaw tightened. "Because I can't trust anyone right now. Not my own eyes, not my own mind. If he's not mine, I need to know." His voice wavered slightly, betraying a sliver of vulnerability that he refused to let surface elsewhere. I can't raise a stranger as my son." Elizabeth's fingers tightened around Marcus's blanket. "He is your son, James. His heart, his eyes, his tiny hands, they are yours. You created him with me. You know that." "I need evidence," James repeated, almost to himself. "And if I'm wrong—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Elizabeth understood. If he was wrong, the shame, the realization of what he had put them through, would be unbearable. The next day, Elizabeth arranged the DNA test quietly, hoping it might bridge the gulf of doubt before it became irreparable. They went to the lab together, the tension in the car almost suffocating. James refused to touch Marcus, sitting rigidly in the passenger seat, his eyes darting nervously to the sleeping infant in the back. At the lab, the technician guided them through the process. Marcus's tiny hand was swabbed first, then James. Elizabeth watched silently, heart hammering. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, a sterile reminder of the confrontation between truth and prejudice. James's face was pale, his lips pressed tightly together, jaw clenched. He avoided looking at Elizabeth, as if she might break under his scrutiny. Hours later, the results came. The lab assistant, professional and neutral, handed the envelope to James. His hand shook slightly as he tore it open. Elizabeth held her breath. Standing a few steps away, Marcus still in his arms, his small eyes blinking innocently. James read the report line by line, his face pale further. The words were clear, indisputable. Marcus Thornton was, in fact, his son. Every marker, every sequence, every piece of evidence confirmed it. For a moment, James said nothing. He blinked rapidly, as if the truth itself had stolen his ability to speak. His hands, which had been trembling with anger moments before, now rested limply at his sides. Elizabeth stepped closer, cautiously. "James," she whispered. He shook his head slowly, incredulity written across his face. It can't be," he muttered. "All this time. I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought you—" He stopped, swallowing hard. His eyes filled with a mixture of shame, confusion, and grief. The weight of his own prejudice, his own denial, pressed down on him like a stone. Elizabeth gently set Marcus on her hip, moving closer. "James, he's yours. He always has been. Nothing changes that. He's ours. You just need to see him the way I see him." James stared at Marcus, who gurgled and reached out with tiny fingers, grasping at the air. The innocence of his child, the pure, unguarded trust, pierced through the wall James had built around himself. For the first time, he felt the magnitude of what he had almost lost. Not the child, but the chance to be a father in every sense of the word. Tears pricked his eyes, and he stepped forward, cautiously at first, then more assuredly. He knelt on the floor, bringing himself to the baby's level. Marcus's tiny hand rested against James's cheek, exploring, curious, unafraid. James froze, stunned by the connection, by the undeniable bond that had existed all along despite his rejection. I'm so sorry," James whispered, his voice trembling. I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have trusted him, trusted us." Elizabeth's tears fell freely now, a mixture of relief and long-held pain. "It's not too late," she said softly. "He needs you now, James. He's always needed you." James looked down at Marcus again, and something shifted inside him, a recognition that love, when allowed, could break even the strongest barriers of fear and prejudice. He reached out carefully, taking one tiny hand his own, feeling the pulse of life that was undeniably, irrevocably his. In that moment, the house that had been heavy with tension for weeks felt lighter, as if the simple, undeniable truth of Marcus's existence had begun to heal what denial and anger had torn apart. For James, it was only the beginning. The road to redemption, to earning the trust of his wife and his son, would be long and fraught with challenge. But as he looked at Marcus, the small life it had almost turned away from, he realized something he had never admitted before. Love could conquer pride, hate, and fear, if he had the courage to let it. And for the first time in weeks, James Thornton, the officer who had demanded proof, allowed himself to feel the overwhelming truth. Marcus was his son, and nothing, not his own prejudices, not his fears, not even his stubborn pride, could change that. James Thornton sat alone in the dim light of the study, the hum of the ceiling fan, the only sound filling the room. The DNA results had been delivered hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to look at them again. Not because he doubted their accuracy, science didn't lie, but because he wasn't ready for what those pages would reveal about his own life. Elizabeth had left the envelope on the kitchen counter that morning. A silent challenge, a test of whether he could face the truth without hiding behind anger. James stared at it now. The paper crumpled slightly from the way he had picked it up and set it down, over and over. Marcus was asleep in the nursery, soft snores echoing through the hall. James wanted to hold him, to feel the warmth of the child who had been the center of his torment and confusion. But he couldn't. Not yet. Pride, that stubborn, unrelenting force, still clenched his chest. Finally, with a deep breath, he opened the envelope. The first page confirmed what he already knew. Marcus was his son. The second page, however, held another revelation, one he hadn't anticipated. Elizabeth's family history, which he had never fully shared, carried a legacy of strength, struggle, and a lineage he had never considered. And buried in that lineage, revealed through the DNA testing, was a connection that shook the very foundation of his identity. James had always defined himself by control, discipline, and the rigid rules he lived by as a police officer. But this genetic truth showed him that the life he had constructed around pride, prejudice, and assumptions had been a fragile facade. He was no longer just confronting Marcus or Elizabeth. He was confronting himself. He sank into the chair, head in hands, the weight of shame pressing down with an almost physical force. All the anger, all the resentment he had carried for weeks, suddenly seemed small, meaningless, and even foolish. In his hands, the envelope felt heavier than any weapon he had ever held. Elizabeth appeared quietly in the doorway, her expression soft, understanding. She didn't speak immediately, sensing that James needed the space to process. Slowly, she stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "James," she said gently, "look at me." He lifted his eyes, glassy with tears, and saw the truth he had been avoiding. She hadn't betrayed him. She hadn't deceived him. The child he had doubted, the son he had almost turned away from, was a living proof of their love and their shared life. And the revelation in the DNA results wasn't just about Marcus. It was about James, about his capacity to change, to grow, and to embrace the consequences of his own prejudices. For the first time, he felt vulnerability, raw and unshielded. It terrified him, but it also freed him. He could feel Marcus stir in the next room, tiny hands moving in sleep, and he realized something profound. Love wasn't about dominance or control. Love was about presence, acceptance, and courage. The courage to admit mistakes, the courage to embrace life's unexpected truths. James stood slowly, shaking, and walked to the nursery. Elizabeth followed, her heart swelling with cautious hope. He knelt beside the crib, staring at Marcus's peaceful face. His hands trembled as he reached out, lightly brushing the baby's cheek. Marcus opened his eyes, looked at James, and smiled, a smile so pure and trusting that it broke through every wall of prejudice James had built. I'm so sorry, James whispered, voice catching. I was wrong. I doubted you. I doubted him. I doubted myself. But I won't make that mistake again. Elizabeth placed a hand over his, feeling the shift inside him. It's never too late, she said softly. What matters is what you do now. James nodded, tears spilling freely, and gently lifted Marcus into his arms, holding the child close. He felt the warmth, the heartbeat, and the undeniable bond that had always existed. Pride and fear melted, replaced by something new, humility, love, and a determination to be the father Marcus deserved. As the night stretched on, the house no longer felt heavy with tension. Laughter from Marcus's soft giggles echoed to the halls, and for the first time in weeks, James felt hope. The DNA results had exposed a secret he never imagined, but in doing so, they had destroyed the pride that kept him from embracing his own family, and in its place, they gave him clarity, love, and the chance to rebuild what he almost lost. Elizabeth watched James cradle their son, and she allowed herself to hope again. They had survived the storm of doubt, prejudice, and fear, and while the road ahead was still challenges, they were united by a truth stronger than anything James had resisted. Family, love, and acceptance. And just as the scene settled, a whisper of suspense lingered in the air. Because while James had confronted his own demons, the story of Marcus's life, their family, and the secrets yet to unfold was far from over. If Season 1 of this story has touched you, if the journey of James, Elizabeth, and Marcus has resonated, then don't stop here. Make sure to subscribe to follow every twist of the story. Like and share this story with friends who need a story of hope and redemption, and leave a comment with your thoughts, reactions, and predictions. Season 2 will uncover deeper truths, challenges, and the choices James must make to truly become the father Marcus deserves. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.